up Bridge 10P, the fourth line east in the former Township of Pilkington. So thanks to Colin and Adam and the whole team for another bridge on time, on budget. Appreciate that. Still on track for 21 bridges in 8 years, so that's exciting to see another bridge rebuilt, and it's a bridge that's been closed since 2015, so I know the residents there and the farmers there will be happy to have a bridge over that river. Disclosure of pecuniary interests under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Any? Okay. Firstly, presentations and announcements, and we have a presentation by Ruth, artist Ruth Lane. Welcome. Oh, there's Bev. Okay, I didn't see you there. You are behind Dan. Welcome, Bev. Yeah, for sure. Didn't mean to ignore you there. I didn't see you there in behind Dan's big head.
That's all right. You were all friends here. Your Honor, the Mayor and Councillors, it's a privilege to be back here again, representing the Elora Arts Council. I'm the chair of the Art and Public Places Committee of the Arts Council, and I have been a founding member since 1985 of the Elora Arts Council. The Arts Council is now changing its name to the Elora Fergus Arts Council. It's confirmed, but it has to go through various, ways of publishing that. And this is to tell everyone that we are very inclusive in the Township of Central Wellington, though we always have been inclusive. We've always worked for everyone, not only our members, but for all the artists, musicians, etc., in the Township of Central Wellington. And we have ongoing programs, and this is one of them. We present art in public places in 4 different places, two municipal places, this one, and the Sportsplex, for 3 months at a time, so 4 times a year, and also at the hospital lobby and in the window of Greg Oak's office. And these, I think the Arts Council has made a great contribution throughout the years to the strength, the continuing strength and growing strength of the arts in this area, which are also becoming a great economic strength. So tonight I would like to welcome and introduce you to Ruth Lane, who has been on the international scene, actually, the national scene at least. And so what you're seeing in this abstract art, bring your questions if you like, and I'd like to introduce Ruth Lane tonight. Ruth?
Thank you, Beverly. Welcome, Ruth.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. So a while back, there's sort of a busy time of the year for artists when they're looking to apply to different, hi Stephen, different opportunities where you can kind of, step outside of your bubble and comfort zone and try different things and meet different people. And so that was in the spring, and I'd been combing the internet to find different things that were outside of, Fergus Elora area, and found this Salt Spring National Art Prize. I brought the catalog in case anybody wanted to see the piece that got chosen. And so I applied to it, not expecting to get in after having a lot of no's, a lot of disappointment, which is sort of par for the course. And then when I opened the email in the morning, it said I was in. And so I said to my husband, I think you need to read this because the way I'm interpreting it, saying that I got in. Anyway, I did get in, and it was a wonderful show. They were very professional. They paid for all the shipping, took a trip to Salt Spring Island. If you've never been, you really should go. It's beautiful. And we went for the closing gala. I didn't win, but I really felt like it was a huge time to kind of meet other artists and be a slightly bigger fish in this. The bowl is just endless. There's so many artists that you'll never find all of them. There were 1,700 artists across the country that applied. This is the third of it's a biennial competition, and there were 1,752 got in, 9 from Ontario, and so anyhow. When the news of that got around, people were congratulating me, and Bev introduced or asked if I would be able to show some work here, and I was happy to do that. And the paintings that you see here, actually, I did freshly off of that experience, crossing over on the ferry, and it was really a beautiful place. And I hope that you've enjoyed looking at the paintings, and we'll continue to look at them for a bit longer. And thank you for having me. If you have any questions, I'm here to answer them. I'll pass this around. I've earmarked the painting in case you want to see. It's for sale. And this might be your chance to get it on the ground floor before I get really collectible and my artwork gets very expensive. Right now it's not.
Thanks very much, Ruth.
Thank you.
Any questions from council? Thanks so much. Appreciate having your art up in the council chambers. Whenever we have to take them down and they're bare walls, we really notice the difference. So we really appreciate you letting us borrow them and look at them.
It's my pleasure.
For the time being.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
We'll make sure you get the book back. Okay, moving on to 3.2, Mayor's County Council report. I don't have a report today. County Council doesn't meet in December, so I'll have my first county report for the new year, starting in January. Councillor committee updates. Councillor Kittredge.
Thank you, Mayor. Today was our last meeting. We had the county appraisal review come, and it was very good news. We had the highest resident participation in a survey. It was 88%. The average is 26 to 30% for social housing. And we also got very good reviews for that. Social housing. That's it.
Councillor Dunsmore.
So economic development meets this Thursday, so I've got nothing to report there. CSAC met, and we were given a presentation from service clubs requesting a 30% discount in the uses of the community centers, and the CSAC committee was wise in that they know that there's a recreation and culture master plan there, and that our staff are reviewing pricing policies and stuff as part of that plan. So they deferred that decision back to staff so that they could include that in part of their research and so forth. We talked a little bit about the indoor turf, and we're prepared to support the committee when that gets ready to go, whenever this council decides, if we pass the budget tonight, CSAC is ready to assist with that. So very positive way to end the year, and we're all set for next year.
Thanks, Councillor Dunsmore. Councillor McRae.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. The QMS meeting will be meeting next week. Healthy Growth Committee members were provided a planning overview by Brett Salmon, Managing Director of Planning and Development. We learned about the interrelatedness of various provincial statutes and policies, county and township official plans, and land use control instruments involving township zoning bylaws, urban design guidelines, site plan control, committee of adjustment, and subdivision control. We also learned about consents, plans of subdivisions, and plans of condominium. We reviewed various land use plans for the township, identifying the greenlands, rural, and urban systems, and we looked at the transportation master plan, proposed transportation network for Centre Wellington, and also the township's active transportation plan. GRCA. The board approved the resolutions in the following reports: the financial summary, as well as a development interference with wetlands and alterations to shorelines and watercourses regulation permit application in Rockwood. We received as information the CEO's report of the audit committee, per diems and honorariums for 2020, cash and investment status, environmental assessments, collaborative water management planning, and current watershed conditions. Some interesting statistics for 2019. There are 59,403 total camping nights for all 8 GRCA campgrounds. We generated approximately $200,000 in revenue for filming, and $586,000 was raised in tubing at the Gorge Park. Lake Erie has since 2014 experienced above normal water levels. 2019 had the highest static water level recorded in over 100 years.
Thanks, Councillor McCrae. Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Kelly. Center Wellington Hydro will be meeting on Thursday to start on the 2020 budget. So don't really have a report for that. Councillor McCrae's already reported on the Growth Committee. Well done, sir. Thank you, Kelly.
Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thank you, Mayor. Heritage Center Wellington did have their meeting last week, and yet I had an overlapping meeting, so I wasn't able to meet that. And as Councillor Dunsmore said, Economic Development meets on the 19th, so a report will be coming in the next meeting. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Van Leeuwen. Councillor McLean?
No committees.
Great, thanks, councillors. Moving on to confirmation of the agenda. We have a slightly revised recommendation here because there was a little bit of a, we have to add something in there. The fees and charges wasn't included. So we have a recommendation of the Township of Center Wellington to confirm the agenda for its meeting held December 16th, 2019, as amended to include the fees and charges bylaw 2019-14, 2019-75.
Yeah, that's a 74.
Oh, it is, eh?
It's a 7.
It's a 7. Oh, okay, it looks like a 1. We have a recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington confirm the agenda for its meeting held December 16, 2019, as amended to include the fees and charges bylaw 2019-74, 2019-75, confirming.
Yeah, that you don't have to add that part. That's just my note to myself.
Can I have a move for that recommendation? Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor Van Leeuwen. All in favor? And that is carried. Thanks. I didn't think it made sense, but it's there. Okay, so moving on to confirmations of minutes. We have several sets of minutes there from the last few months. I have a recommendation that the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meetings held August 14th, September 23rd, October 8th, November 4th, 2019, and that the council meeting held November 25th, 2019 be adopted as circulated. Mover for that recommendation, Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor Van Leeuwen. Any questions about those minutes? All in favor? And those minutes are carried. Section 6, we have Committee of the Whole. It's a fairly substantial Committee of the Whole. It does include a few items that I am assuming that councillors are going to want to pull out, so I am going to be proactive and suggest that we pull out item 5, which is the budget, adopting the 2020 budget, and that we pull out item 6, which is related to the ULG Cultural Heritage Funds implementation. No, item 7. Sorry, item 7 related to allocating $55,000 to Scottish Festival and $55,000 to the Lower Southern for the Arts. Just based on the way we voted before, I think that councillors will want those pulled out. Anything else that councillors want pulled out of the Committee of the Whole? Okay, so we'll deal with 1, 2, 3, 4,
6.
and 6. So I'll read that recommendation first. Recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington approve the report items 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, dated December the 3rd and 5th, 2019, as circulated. Move for that recommendation. Councillor Van Leeuwen, seconded by Councillor Dunsmore. See you later. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, that's carried. Okay, so let's move on to the 2 items there. The first item, item 5, is adopting the 2020 budget as amended. So what I'd like to do here, unless a member of council wants to change their vote from the way that they voted on December 3rd Budget Committee meeting, I don't think we need to have additional discussion on this. We've had a lot of time already for councillors to explain their thoughts in the budget. So I'd like to get a mover for that recommendation. Councillor McCrae, seconded by Councillor Dunsmore. All in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Okay, then we'll deal with the number 7. So this is dealing with, I'll just read out number 7 because I want to make it clear what we're talking about. That the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington allocate $55,000 of the OLG Cultural Heritage and Arts Funds to the Fergus Scottish Festival and $55,000 to the Elora Centre for the Arts, and further that the remaining funds be allocated as set out in the draft budget. So can I so the recommendation then is that the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington approve report item number 7 from the Committee of the Whole dated December 3rd and 5th, 2019 as circulated. Can I have a mover for that, number 7? Councillor Dunsmore, second by Councillor McCrae. All in favor of that? Opposed? And that's carried. We have no delegations. Number 8 is consideration of reports, temporary borrowing bylaw, and we turn things over to our Managing Director of Corporate Services and Treasurer, Dan. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. This is a report we do every year, just before the beginning of a new calendar year. This report authorizes temporary borrowing if required throughout the year from a cash flow perspective. We do pass this bylaw annually, but we have never had to use it. As per the Municipal Act, temporary borrowing should not exceed 50% of estimated revenues set out by the budget from January to September, and 25% of estimated revenues from October to December 31st. So it's just a precautionary measure, but we've never had to use it in the past.
Thanks, then. Questions, comments from council? Okay, I'll read the recommendation. The Council of the Township of Centre Wellington pass a bylaw to establish temporary borrowing for 2020. Mover for that recommendation, Councillor Van Leeuwen, seconded by Councillor Dunsmore. All in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Moving on to the interim tax levy bylaw. Nan?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. This is another bylaw that we pass every year to basically have levies at the beginning of the year from an interim perspective. This allows us to collect taxes in the first half of the year within 2020 before tax policy is set by the county, which is typically in May of the year in question. So this allows us to levy 50% of taxes levied in 2019 in the first half of 2020. And from a bylaw perspective, we're establishing installment dates for residential properties. Tax installments 1 and 2 for the year would be February 28th and April 30th. And then for non-residential and multi-class properties, installments 1 and 2 would be March 31st and May 29th.
Thanks, Dan. Questions from council? Okay, read the recommendation that the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington pass a bylaw to provide for an interim tax levy for 2020 and to provide for the payment of taxes by installments. Mover for that recommendation? Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor Van Leeuwen. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thanks, Dan. The Birkholz drainage work sounds interesting. We have a report from Carrie. Anything interesting there or not?
I really don't have anything further to add. The Drainage Act requires that a municipality maintain all municipal drains. Council will recall that they authorized the work back in August. The work is complete now, and it is now time to pass the bylaw to make sure that it can then be collected from the affected properties.
So just remind me that this is really just a pass-through, right? Like, we don't do anything, this just passes through the municipality, but everything is figured out by the province?
No, you're maybe thinking of tile drainage loan.
Yeah, I am.
No, this is where there's a municipal drain, it's
Okay.
been clogged, it needs to be cleaned out, and once it's cleaned out, the work is done, then those people affected by that municipal drain are then invoiced for the cost, depending on their use of the drain.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Any questions from council on this one? Okay, I'll read the recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington authorizes the mayor and clerk to execute a bylaw to provide for the maintenance and repair to the Birkholz drainage works and for the borrowing on the credit of the municipality for the amount required for such work. Can I have a mover for that recommendation? Councillor McElwain, seconded by Councillor Foster. All in favor? And that's carried. Let the works begin. 8.4, the Wellington County Member Municipality Services Review Final Report. And I'll turn that over to our CEO, Andy.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. So this is, we had a bit of a discussion during our budget discussions with regards to this report. This is the final report from KPMG. If you recall back earlier in the spring, the province allocated some funding to all the local municipalities as well as the county to look at a modernization, basically a service review with internal. Many of the municipalities are now undertaking that. We were ahead of the game, out of the blocks early. We worked with the other local municipalities in the county, and KPMG was awarded the contract, as well kicked off their process by meeting at our council back in August. So they've been working with the steering committee of the local CAOs, as well as looking at some of the benchmark material. And the report you have before you tonight is their final report with regards to the top 20 services that they feel that we could review in more depth to look at additional cost savings or service efficiencies. The intent is that the local CAOs from all the municipalities in the county will start working towards looking at each of those 20 different priorities or service reviews. They may take forms in different pieces. There may be different partners from all the municipalities. Although you see this as 20 and 20, it does not mean that every municipality will participate in each of those 20. They were listed so that there's an opportunity for all the municipalities to come together or not. Some of them may already have contractual obligations that they can't get out of. So it could be 3 municipalities working together. It could be all 7 with the county. It could be one of the local municipal providers providing the service to the other municipalities, similar to what we do already with the fire training officer as well as source water protection. So we're going to be looking at all those. So what we're looking for tonight is for receipt of the report from KPMG, and then the local CAOs and the county CAO will be working and coming back as we review those areas and looking at those priorities based on things that are coming up within each of the municipalities. Also attached to the report is a grant application that is already one of the first things we're looking at right out of the block, is looking at a review of IT services. We're fortunate we do have our own internal IT staff to be looking after ours, but a number of the municipalities are coming together. I think it's all the municipalities except for the municipality of Erin. And so we are applying to the next second round of grant opportunities coming out of the province, which closed on December 6th. To take a further depth review of how we could better share our services within IT across the various municipalities. That could mean, for some areas, it would mean bringing in a firm to help them run their own, or it could mean one of the local municipalities like ourselves at the county that do have IT departments that could be providing those services to some of the other municipalities, depending on what their needs and things are at as well. It also is going to be looking at what current contractual obligations each of the municipalities have with regards to their current services providers or programs. And one I think we've talked about, Dan has mentioned earlier about our asset management software. So that is something that very early on, all of the municipalities will be looking to purchase together. A number of the municipalities already have that asset management software from one firm, and the rest of us are looking to join on board with that, so that we would have one asset management software program across the county in order to share data, share our support mechanisms and our staffing to be able to help support and implement those across the table. So tonight we're looking for a receipt, and we'll be working continuously and reporting back to each of the local municipalities into the county on the top 20 and working through those as time permits to be able to bring those forward, as well as approval for submission to join the group of municipalities in Wellington County that are applying for a grant to the province to help support a more in-depth dive into IT services.
Thanks, Andy. I just wanted to add a couple points. The first thing I wanted to reiterate that this money came from the province of Ontario through the modernization grant. So one of the areas that the province wanted us to look at was finding internal efficiencies. So the scope of this project is very much along the lines of what the province wanted us to do. It's the first time that all 7 member CAOs and the county CAO have worked together in a project, in a comprehensive project way to start the process of finding efficiencies. So I just want to make it caution you, like these, a lot of the things that have come out, the recommendations are at a high level right now. It's about asking the right questions right now, where there's absolutely no thought that all the CAOs know all the answers, but they have identified areas where we think where the CAOs think that there are potential efficiencies that could be had. A lot of times we're doing similar kinds of functions, and it makes sense to get together and discuss if there's a way forward, if there's operational benefits that could come out of it. And the other point I wanted to stress, it was an operational review. That's why CAOs were involved. It doesn't touch governance and doesn't touch anything like that. It's strictly operational. How can we do what we do more effectively? And the other piece I want to make clear is every potential opportunity has to go through both the county structure and the member municipality council structure in order to pass. So it's really getting the ball rolling. There's a ton of work that has to be done. And already some of the municipalities have identified that IT is a great place to start. Questions from council on this one? Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. CEO Goldie, so for example, some of the benefits we might get by going in with the other municipalities would be we might be able to, I guess, bargain for better prices, say from an IP provider, from hardware equipment providers, as well as software, so things like Microsoft, we could get a better site license agreement just through the bulk. Yeah.
Very much so, and we're even looking at it as to part of the challenge that some of the smaller municipalities have is their contracts are very small. So when they make a phone call, they're not getting responded to. So being a larger organization that would be partnering together, then they'd have more need to be able to respond quicker to those municipalities, as we would be one large one group.
Okay, follow on.
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. So for example, in terms of servers, would you have sort of one dedicated server location, or would each municipality still have its own server location? Because those can be quite expensive, especially when you get into the air conditioning and everything.
Yeah, I don't have the answer for that. That is probably what we're going to be looking at, part of what we're going to be looking at. We will need to also respect the security component from each of the municipalities, so we'll have to take a look at that, of how that works. Obviously, cybersecurity is one of the bigger issues that smaller municipalities have across Ontario with regards to the expertise. So we feel that by sharing that expertise, for example, if something comes up very quickly, we can be sharing our services to the municipalities if they're not getting the answer, and cost sharing that across the table as well.
Councillor McElwain?
Thanks, Kelly. Some of the other areas that were mentioned, Andy, included sharing public works facilities and exploring winter maintenance, working together, which could imply or impact our requirement for an operations center. And then it also mentions facility management practices across the different municipalities, and we're hiring somebody for that area. It also mentions functional management, and we're hiring an engineering management person. Should we be looking, before we invest in any of these things I just mentioned into potentially sharing these costs with the other municipalities before we start investing our own money in them?
I think we're at the stage where our requirements are larger than most of the other smaller municipalities. We are going to be exploring that if it's a matter that, for example, our needs are a full-time position and we could bring in on another part-time and full-time position to be able to support those other municipalities like we do for the fire services or for source water, where we split it, the county pays for one position and then the local municipalities pay for the local position. So there's lots of different ways to be looking at, but based on our current needs, we do need to do the hirings that are included in the budget and council just approved. But as we move forward, some of these will take several years. The Public Works operation facility, I think you heard from Colin during the budget time that we've already had that discussion with the county. The county's long-term plan is not to be building a new center in Centre Wellington. They're looking at other municipalities to be doing those because their garages and the other local municipalities are in more dire straits. So it's probably 8 to 10 years before they're looking. And they are also not looking in the same areas that we are looking to be able to service the county because they're not worried about the urban center. They're more about the rural center. We're focusing on needing to make sure that our operations are servicing the urban center at the same time being able to go out to the rural centers.
Councillor Foster?
Thanks, Kelly. Further to Councillor McElwain's question, Andy, effectively this report contradicts our own budget. Our own budget is advocating for a new operations center. This report is advocating that we share one, or at least look to collaborating with the other municipalities. Can you explain that discrepancy?
I sure can. As part of my presentation, what I did highlight was the fact that although there are 20 recommendations for all the 7 municipalities in the county, that does not mean every one of those recommendations will be a priority for each of the municipalities. There are a number of priorities within there out of the top 20 that maybe only 2 or 3 of the municipalities will be a priority for them and a need for them. So example for the Public Works Operations Center, we already have that conversation. KPMG is well aware. They are looking to partner with Aaron at this stage, and they've just completed one in Mapleton, but those locations geographically work for the county and the local municipality. But they do not work, and we've had that discussion with the county already. So we would not be partnering with the county for a public works facility and operations center within Centre Wellington. And the mayor has spoken to that as well at our budget meetings, that is not within their long-term forecast either.
Councillor McElwain?
Thanks again, Kelly. Just the winter maintenance one in particular was of more interest to me, Andy, because it seems to make sense in parts of the municipality, our municipality and the others, that Aaron, for instance, could do snow plowing in the west end of ours, or the east end of our municipality, and we could do snow plowing in the north. It's that kind of thing, and share facilities and share trucks and whatever else is required, whereas we're spending $500,000 next year of taxpayers' money to justify building something and keeping others and potentially not keeping others, and we don't know what, and until the study is done in a little bit more detail, I don't think we're working with the right amount of information.
I think, as Colin explained during the budget process, our operations center is not just talking about servicing the existing community. We are going to be doubling our population nearly, and so that is what we're also looking at for ours. Most of the other municipalities are not growing at the speed we're growing and do not have the forecasted growth that we are having to meet. So therefore, their priorities with regards to how they service that are different than ours, as well as the counties. We have had the conversation with the county. We will be looking at, the county possibly looking at plowing some of our roads versus us plowing theirs. But there is a lot of coordination and discussions that need to go about that with regards to insurance, levels of service, things of that nature. So we have to make sure that we're consistent across that within each of the municipalities.
I also want to repeat what I just said, that this is really a first step. Some of these things are years and years out. This was the first time that we're looking at potential future efficiencies. It's not talking about 2020. So, you know, there's some similarities with what we're doing now in the words of what we're talking about doing in maybe 5, 6, 7 years out. This is just the first step. So there's a ton of work that has to go on in really putting a little bit more detail in each of those top 20 recommendations. And as that goes as the municipalities in the county gets further into the details, that's when it comes back to council, and then we have a fulsome discussion about things. But at this point, it's just we're just initiating this, and it has to start somewhere. It's just never been done. It's starting somewhere, and I think that's a positive thing. And that's really all we're asking for in this recommendation. And the further that part of this recommendation is asking for the endorsement of it from this council, so we can put in to an application for funding. So that's really what we're asking for today. We're not really talking too much about every specific recommendation that came out of this. Any other questions? Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thank you. No, it's not really a question. It's a comment on the actual project itself. It's quite interesting because I don't think in the past we've spoken about things like partnering up for investments and all kinds of those things. In past councils, how can we get better revenues, better interest rates? So it's interesting to look at that and go, I've never really thought of actually gathering together as a group and investing, and possibly when you take your funds out, someone else puts theirs in. There's so many possibilities. So the whole package and thought is actually more interesting than I thought it would be from the get-go. I originally thought, well, there goes $25,000, but it looks like something's pulled together pretty good.
Okay, read the recommendation of the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington. Receive for information the Wellington County and member municipality service review final report from KPMG dated November 28, 2019. And further, that Council supports the participation and collaboration of Township staff with the County of Wellington and the member municipalities with respect to the implementation of the efficiency initiatives. And further, that Council support the submission of a multi-party expression of interest (EOI) for the proposed third-party IT service delivery review project for the Township of Wellington North, Town of Minto, Township of Mapleton, Township of Puslinch, Guelph and Mossett Township, the Township of Centre Wellington, and Wellington County. Mover for that recommendation, Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor McCrae. All in favor? Opposed? Defining efficiencies. That carries. Eight point 5, appointment to Committee of Adjustment. A report from our Supervisor of Customer Service, Deputy Clerk Lisa. And I'll read the recommendations and ask if there's any questions. It's fairly straightforward. That the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington appoint Fernando Marin to the Committee of Adjustment, and that the Mayor and Clerk be authorized to execute a bylaw appointing the member to the Committee of Adjustment. Any questions about that one? Have a mover. Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor McCrae. All in favor? And that's carried. Moving on to a bylaw to restrict weight of vehicles passing over certain bridges. A report that Colin's going to provide, I'm guessing. Welcome, Colin.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Linton, members of council. So this is not a new item. We every 2 years, as council is aware, we do an inspection of all 108 of the bridge structures. So when we refer to structures, we're looking at bridges and culverts with greater than a 3-meter span. And we have a number of structures that we're watching a little more carefully, a little more frequently. So every 6 months, we look at another set of structures. And under the Highway Traffic Act, actually OREG 103, municipalities are required to pass a bylaw to enact the load restrictions for any structures that require them. So the list is in the report. Really, there's no change from before, with the exception of one structure, 3E. Structure 3E, which is on the 6th line in former Aramosa Township. And the load restriction there is being reduced from 8 tones to 5 tones. And kind of operationally, no change. It already has one of those height limiters to restrict the size of vehicles that can pass over the bridge. But it is the engineering consultant is recommending that that be reduced. And so the report before you has a copy of the draft bylaw. There's a location map showing location of the structures and being referred to in the report, and also the engineer's report on the load restricted bridges is attached as well. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Colin. Questions from council on this one? Okay, I'll read the recommendation that the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington adopt a bylaw to restrict the weight of vehicles passing over certain bridges in the Township of Centre Wellington. I have a mover for that recommendation. Councillor McCrae, seconded by Councillor Foster. All in favor? And that's carried. Moving on to 8.7, Bridge 24WG and Bridge 4WG EAs. Colin?
Okay. So I'm going to look at Lisa. Do we have a presentation? Do you have that? Ooh, maybe I'm dropping the ball on that one. Okay. I think I might be. Okay. Okay, that would be great. So we do have Stephen Keane from SEMA. Stephen and SEMA have been helping out the township through the class environmental assessment process for 2 structures. So Bridge 24WG, located on the first line and of former West Garifraxa Township, and then also 4WG, located on the 5th line in former West Garifraxa Township. So they're both bowstring bridges, kind of single lane bowstring bridges, approximately 100, just under 100 years old for both of them. And so, as council will recall, we combined the environmental assessment process and got them moving forward through the EA. First line, just for some background, the first line bridge is closed currently. It closed, I believe, a couple of years ago, and structure 4WG is currently open. It has a height limiter to restrict, again, the size of vehicles, and has a load restriction on it as well. Any luck, Lisa? Or okay, is the PDF usable in the? Yeah, that might be the way to go for now.
Where do I see this? You see them on the screens here. Okay. Yeah, just they're attached to the report. Just didn't get pulled.
Thank you. Now. Good evening, Mayor Linton and members of council. I think Colin's already gone over the bridges in former West Garifraxa and where they are. So yeah, you can go down another one, I think. Okay, so yeah, so we've been leading a municipal Class A process, a Schedule B. We started just about a year ago. We were part of the big public information centre back in April when we presented sort of existing conditions, the problem, and in order to get public input. We then went away and looked at the alternative solutions and came back last month and presented again to another public meeting, preliminary recommendations. And we're here now with a draft project file report for the two bridges. And we've still got a little consultation to do with the Conservation Authority, but the plan is to sort of file that project file report in early 2020. So if you want to go down again, that'd be great. Existing conditions, yeah, okay, I think Colin's talked about the 24WG is over Irvine Creek. The 24WG was 1922, 4WG is 1923, both concrete bowstring arch bridges. If you want to go down the next one, got a few pictures of what they look like today. So 24WG, you'll see, is closed to traffic right now, and the bridge deck is in very poor conditions, height and load restrictions. It's a substandard overall roadway width that can't accommodate two lanes of traffic, and there's a lack of roadside barrier protection for the bridge. So it's an old bridge. Next one. And there you'll see the underside, the advanced state of deterioration in that bridge. It's really beyond its useful life at this point. Next slide. 4WG, as Colin mentioned, there's a height and load restriction on that bridge. Also lack of roadside barrier protection, narrow shoulders, which makes it difficult for larger vehicles to pass by. Yeah, down again. And you can see that the concrete's in quite an advanced state of deterioration. And again, lack of roadside barriers and protection. So, as far as the Class A process is concerned, the problem and opportunity statement that's part of the process, the bridges are in poor condition with a number of functional and operational deficiencies and are basically at the end of their useful service life. So the purpose of the EA then became to address the advanced state of deterioration, come up with a solution to what to do with them. So next slide. So the alternative solutions are do nothing. It's always part of the EA process. It just remains as is. 24WG would remain closed and 4WG would eventually have to close. Eventually, the option 1 is really the same as option 4, because eventually you would have to remove them anyway, because they'd start falling into the water. So option 2 is to rehabilitate the bridge as they are. Option 3 is to replace them with a brand new bridge, and option 4 is to remove them altogether and just have no crossing of those particular water bodies. So we then did a whole lot of background study into the various aspects of the environment. First of all, we did a geotechnical investigation, did boreholes at both bridges on either side, either bank, to find out what was in the soil there and whether they can accommodate a new bridge. Natural environment survey, cultural heritage, very important for both bridges. Archaeological Services Inc. did a CHER, as it's called, Cultural Heritage Evaluation Report, presented to the Heritage Committee, sent to Wellington in May, and then a Heritage Impact Report presented to the Heritage Committee last month. We also had to do a hydraulic study to determine the desired flow capacity under the bridge, because both of the bridges were built in the 1920s prior to Hurricane Hazel, so pretty much any structure built prior to Hurricane Hazel is undersized to accommodate the regional storms. Then we did preliminary design and cost estimates for the alternative solutions. And we used a number of evaluation criteria to evaluate the options, roadway geometrics, as well as, I won't read them all out, but full range of economic criteria to come up with a preferred option. Now, I'm going to, this is a very brief summary of the evaluation. There's a number of advantages, of course, of replacing the bridge in terms of providing adequate structure width to accommodate large, heavy vehicles, farm equipment, 2 lanes of traffic, and also to provide a safer bridge, obviously. But then there's also the cost factor that becomes very important. With rehabilitating those bridges, you can't rehabilitate those bridges and expect them. Oh, and the other major factor in terms of replacing it is also accommodating the regional storms, as I just mentioned, because they don't satisfy various criteria that conservation authorities have. So 4WG, for example, if you were to rehabilitate it, you'd have to do it every 25 years. So what we did, we looked at a 75-year life cycle costing for the options. If you replace the bridge, you spend 1.4 million and you get a bridge that will last you 75 years. But if you rehabilitate it, you have to do it every 25 years. So over the 75 years, it's going to cost you roughly 3 times as much in the long run to rehabilitate the bridge than compared with replacing the bridge. Similarly, for 24WG, your 75-year cost for rehabilitation is 8.1 million compared with 3.2 million if you replace it with a new bridge. And the minor costs for the do-nothing and the alternative 4 is basically that's the cost of removing the existing bridges. So the recommended option, obviously, is to replace both bridges. However, there is one loss, and that's the heritage value of those 2 bridges. And Archaeological Services, Inc. Did recommend, in the case of replacement of the bridges, that it should, I'll read them there, bridge and setting should be professionally documented prior to reconstruction. And the replacement structure should be designed in a manner that is sympathetic to the cultural heritage attributes of the subject bridge. And I believe Colin was saying that in previous examples there have been plaques and various features put into bridges where they have been replaced like this. So it could be exterior finishes or impressions and so forth. That's something that would have to be worked out in detailed design when the project moves forward. And this just to give you a quick idea of what the replacement bridges will look like. This is 4WG. Basically, the length of the bridge would, the length of the bridge, it does increase basically to, because of the hydraulic modeling we did in order to accommodate the regional storm. The span of the bridge does increase. The type of bridge, it would be basically a precast bridge in 5 elements. Basically, the bridge would be built in a factory somewhere and basically transported here and basically dropped into place by crane. So that's 4WG, and 24WG, that would be, it's a longer bridge, and again, there's a slight increase in the span. This was mainly because currently the abutments are in the water right now with water lapping around them, which is not particularly good for keeping a long life. So, and also construction, again, conservation authorities prefer construction to take place in the dry. They don't like to see construction take place in the stream. It makes construction more complicated and the impacts to fisheries and all that. So we've lengthened it mainly because of that reason. That would be more of a typical beam and abutment construction. Next one. So, next steps. we have to, really, our next steps is talk to Grand River Conservation Authority. We've not heard feedback from our hydraulics report at this point. That's usually a very important step. But once we've got through any negotiations we need to do with the Conservation Authority, it's then a case of posting completion of the EA study in local newspapers, online and by mail, responding to our contact list. And at the end of the review, we finalize the report. And then it's over to Colin to update his budget and scope of work and move forward with the design and into construction. And Colin tells me detailed design and obtaining regulatory approvals proposed for 2020. Construction then to be 21-ish, depending on budgets.
Great, thank you very much. Anything to add to that, Colin?
So really we're asking council for a couple things, just to endorse the preferred alternative, which is the replacement of both structures, and then also to direct staff to essentially wrap up the class environmental assessment process, authorize us to publish the notice of completion to let the community, residents know about the end stakeholders about the preferred option and wrap up the EA requirements.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. It's good to go through all the components of an EA process, because we don't always do that, and it's good for council to understand every step that you have to go through and the different factors that you're looking at, so appreciate that. Questions from council? Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. I have about 4 or 5 questions. I guess first of all, COB in your report section 2.6.1 for Bridge 24WG, page 10, has consideration been given to sharing hydraulic modeling data with the GRCA in order for them to develop and maintain a hydraulic model for the region? I'm thinking long-term, if we could reduce our modeling costs if the GRCA maintained an overall database with this info that was then shared with the various municipalities, if that would be helpful.
That's a good question. There was no model available to us, so we really had to create one from scratch for both bridges. Many situations that I deal with, we do get a model from the Conservation Authority. The larger water courses, they tend to have a model, but I'm not sure that it actually saves a lot of money, because when you're replacing a structure, you still have to recreate a new model for the new structure and various variations on that. So it might save a little bit of money, but probably not a lot. It'll probably speed things up, because when somebody can start with given a model, it will get them going quicker a bit, because we had to create one.
Yeah. The reason I ask is the organization I used to work with, we maintained a digital library of every city we worked in. Yeah. So any new proposed buildings that are added to our model, we shared that with different planning departments. So I'm just thinking if there was an opportunity here.
Well, I mean, any modeling we've done, we will give to the Conservation Authority, so they will have that next time round. So.
Thank you. Next question is related to report section 5.1, road construction, page 30. The report indicates active transportation facilities are not proposed for fifth line, as the roadways are not part of the county's active transportation network. However, our transportation master plan identifies fifth line as part of a draft province-wide cycling network. Should we be designing our bridge to accommodate this cycling network, or do planners believe vehicle volumes are sufficiently low not to warrant active transportation lanes on the bridge?
Yeah, through Mayor Linton, so yeah, great question. That's part of the province's province-wide cycling network. They've actually identified Fifth Line as a provincial cycling route. And I think it could be looked at a few different ways. It's probably not one that we would actually see specific separate bike lanes or cycle tracks constructed, but we'd probably see a wider paved shoulder, I would think, in this location. That's typically what we see in the rural areas, that Quite often, most roads end at the white solid painted line on the edge, and then there's a gravel drop off. In this case, you know, that would be something as Fifth Line gets reconstructed in the future or resurfaced, you know, just to make that a little bit wider, to make it a bit safer for cyclists, maybe leave, you know, 0.8 to a meter of space beyond the white line. So I think that is kind of where the province was going with that. In terms of the bridge, it is definitely wider than what's there. So the lanes, I believe, were 3.25. Yeah, they're 3.25 meter lanes, which is a bit narrow, and that's based on the current traffic volumes and the speed of that road, which is, I don't know if everybody's aware, but it's actually 50 kilometers an hour, although our data shows pretty much zero, almost zero. Pretty much no one does, obviously, 50 kilometers an hour along that road. It's closer to 80 to 90 is what the measured speeds are along there, even though it's signed 50. So we've taken that design approach, but I think that's something, as we go into detailed design, we'll look at that a little bit closer. We might reach out to the province as well, I think is a good idea, and there might be an opportunity to widen that deck out a bit, because if there is plans to do a formalized cycling route along there that the province has identified, I think we'd want the lane widths a little wider through there, maybe closer to 4 meters each lane. So that's a fair point, and I think something that we can include in the report as well.
Okay, thank you. Report section 5.4, hydraulics, page 37. What is the regional event? Is it the worst case scenario for the area based on analysis of 2, 5, 10, 25, 50, or 100-year storm events?
Regional is it's Hurricane Hazel, basically.
Hurricane Hazel, okay.
Yeah. It seems to happen not once in a lifetime, once every 2 weeks these days, I think. It seems.
Okay, and then my last question. Report section 5.4, hydraulics, page 38. Will the cost of the proposed upstream berm be included in the 24WG bridge costs or listed separately?
It was already included in the figures that I presented
okay.
tonight, yes.
And what is the proposed material composition of the berm?
It could just be your regular earth, you know, fill from somewhere else. It would be seeded so as it wouldn't wash away or anything like that. Yeah. Worst case scenario, there might be some mesh put down to make sure that it doesn't move. It's a detailed design question, to be honest.
Because the intent is to try and deflect the floodwaters more into the center of the bridge?
Yes, yeah. Yes. What we found was that because of the lay of the land outside of the bridges, there was a lot of the water that would simply bypass the bridge and go over that way. So, and while there was still capacity under the bridge, so we recommended the beam to sort of basically direct the water to go under the bridge and not cause flooding.
I guess my concern would just be if it's designed to, if the intent is for it to be directing the flow, that material needs to withstand potential erosion over time as we get some major storm events like Hazel.
Yeah, it would definitely be a consideration in the detailed design phase to make sure that that berm is stable.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions from Council? Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. Question, a lot of these bridges in West Garry and other townships were built with the bowstring. It's an historic, iconic design. Is there any ability to add those bowstrings, even cosmetically rather than structurally, to maintain the heritage and culture and honor our history?
Yeah, it is possible to do something like that. I was part of a team that designed a bridge in Vaughan. This was going back 20 years. It was a very large and long bridge, in actual fact, very expensive bridge at the time in Vaughan. It was a 90-meter span, and it was going across quite a very nice valley, and it was stream and walkways and all that. And so the decision was to make it look rather than just like a box, you know. We put in a false, we called it a false apron. It was basically putting in a curve. When you looked on the side, it looked like the bridge was like that, they nicknamed it the London Fog Bridge at the time. It cost extra money. There was a premium to doing that. And it had no structural function, by the way, that it simply masked the squareness of everything. It was probably about a 25% premium. It was a few $100,000 extra to do that. Now that's perhaps a little extreme, but there may be lesser things that could be done, maybe for less money. And I think the recommendation will be, during the detailed design, will be to look at options, what could be done. And it's a case of how much you want to spend, really. You know, anything can be done with money.
Yeah.
Colin?
Yeah, if I could just add, so our, the township's approach, like with the St. David Street Bridge, we do have the commemorative plaque commemorating the previous structure that's attached to the bridge. We also had custom form work done as part of the parapet walls that basically had the same geometric shape, same number of stringers as the previous bowstring bridge. So that's an imprint on the outside of the bridge. Also the little bump outs, the viewing areas are the same shape. So there's a way to do that. Obviously anything's possible with money. So, but it also would require a wider structure too. Now, if we're widening out the lanes, we have to, allow for, maybe it's 0.4 meters of a false arch. That would also require us to widen the structure overall too. So there would be cost associated with that. So, yeah, just some thoughts on that.
And just to remind folks that this has gone through the Heritage Committee, so I'm sure those discussions were obviously had during the Heritage Committee as well. Councillor Fana?
Thank you, and I was waiting for that. Actually, at the Heritage Committee, there was some recommendations. They understand, obviously, the costs and allocations and all that from the township-wide. And when you actually look at the pictures of this bridge, especially 4WG, I guess it is, you can see that most of the concrete's falling apart in the center structures and rails. But there was some request just to have a look at whether or not the sides could be taken off and maybe placed in a location like Bissell Park or somewhere it could be better viewed. I can't even see taking the whole entire bridge. It wouldn't be worth the dollars. But I guess, will there be consideration to, while they disassemble, to look at some of those options?
Through Mayor Linton. So yeah, of course, yeah, that's an option if council so wishes. That if we could look at the smaller structure. I think there's an opportunity there, similar to what the county has done with the structure up at Wellington Terrace, just on the trail system there. With the smaller structure, there might be an opportunity to kind of lift it out of place and move it kind of intact. It's still going to, like you mentioned, there's still some concrete work to be done, and we'd have to prep an area for it to be placed. But there is certainly an opportunity there, and kind of what I would suggest is that through the detailed design phase, that's something that we could look into further, and maybe talk to a contractor or two to get an idea of cost, because it's not something that happens every day. Talk to the county as well, and that can perhaps be part of the budget discussions at a future date prior to construction.
Councillor Kitchens?
Thank you, Mayor. Is 24WG, is that an increase in the price that was projected in the budgets as proposed? He had 3.2.
Yeah, it is. I remember we talked about it.
And how much is that?
What's your number? 3, is it, I think? No. Which one? 24? 24WG is 3.2. Yeah, I do remember there was a difference. Yeah.
So we have 3.2 million as the estimate in the EA, 1.825 million as the estimate in the current capital budget.
Councillor Kitchers?
What is the reason for that disparity in budgeting? Will that mean that we'll be coming back with a more expensive proposal next year? Is that what's going to happen?
So, yeah, so we're two different cost estimates. So we've, as part of the capital budget, made a set of assumptions for bridges that are out further in the forecast, based on the deck area, based on a replacement cost. So we've got a number of assumptions built into ours. So ours is before we get information on things like the hydraulics, things like the geotech conditions. You'll see sheet piling is required for the abutments. So these are details that we don't have when we're doing the 30,000 foot high estimate. Now we're at about maybe 10,000 feet with a whole lot more information. And as we get into detailed design as well, we'll have even more information to refine those estimates further.
Well, I think we've done enough bridges to know this process. That's the way you do the process, and the price might even come in higher after we go out to tender. So it's a step process. We identify how much we anticipate based on a set of assumptions. We do EA, get a little bit finer in the costing, and then we go out to tender and see what the market bears, right? And so that's the nature of doing infrastructure renewal. Any other questions from council? Okay, I read the recommendation of the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington endorse preferred alternative number 3, replace existing bridge for bridge 24WG and bridge 4WG class environmental assessment as outlined in report number IS 2019-36, and that Council directs staff to publish the notice of study completion in the class environmental assessment in accordance with the requirements under the Environmental Assessment Act. Move for that recommendation, Councillor Foster, seconded by Councillor McCrae. All in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much for your work on this. Appreciate that. And thanks, Colin. Okay, moving on to 9. We have an information item, capital project status report, and no decisions, but turn things over to, that's just for information. Any questions from council? It's just the status of our capital projects right now. Councillor Kitchers?
Thank you, Mayor. The Jack R. McDonald Bridge, what is the total that it's going to cost?
We don't have a final total yet. The bridge was just opened and we're just settling up the final contract documents and invoicing with the contractor. So we do not have that. We probably won't have that for another month or two.
It says,
Councillor Kitchers?
it says here that the expenditures are 2.375, 530. What can we expect on top of that?
I don't think, I'm not going to let staff respond based on expectation. They'll give us the numbers when they have them. Councillor Kitchers?
For the West Mill Street, is the 1.75990, is that the total cost?
Which number in the report are you referring to, Councillor Kitchers?
It says 45.
Okay.
Still costs outstanding for that one? Or, okay.
It says complete, though.
The project's complete. The invoice haven't all come in.
Sorry, yeah, so we're just substantial completion, which is issued 61 days. So we, after 61 days from substantial, we issue the holdback. So So that's kind of the stage we're at. So there's a little bit of work on the last payment certificate as well as the holdback being released probably the next week.
And that will come to council when all the projects are completed, right? Good. Anything else on this information item, Councillor Kitchus?
I guess it's item 103. Has nothing been done on that project except for 24,000 in design?
Through Mayor Linton, so we've got through we've completed the feasibility
So
study.
just so people
Sorry.
know what we're talking about
Okay,
here,
yeah,
for all our thousands that are watching us on live streaming, we're talking about the digester roof replacement at the Fergus wastewater treatment plant.
Yes, yeah. So this is a replacement of the secondary digester roof, and we worked with Jacobs Engineering to look at. There's a number of technologies that we could use for the replacement of that roof, and we've done essentially a comparison of alternatives and selected what we would like to replace the roof with. Basically, another floating roof. It's a floating roof that changes elevation based on the pressure and the amount of gas and the amount of biosolids in the tank. And so we've completed that process. The next step, just kind of working with our purchasing department to get the contract out for, we believe, a design build would be suitable in this case. And so we are just working on the purchasing documents for that design build for completion in 2020.
Councillor Kitchus?
I was under the impression when that came to budget last year that was an emergency. And I'm wondering why it's taking 2 years then.
It's certainly urgent and kind of relates back to some of the staffing discussion that we've been having. We are moving ahead as quickly as possible to prepare purchasing documents, procurement documents, and we're just working within the resources that we have. Certainly it is a high priority project. We as staff definitely recognize that. But we are trying to balance a number of high priority projects within the community, and this one is next on the list to be completed and purchasing documents assembled. So definitely not completed as early as we'd like, but we're working within the resources that we have.
Councillor Kitchus?
63. It has that we are $520,000 that we haven't spent on that. And I'm just wondering, just as, you know, you're concerned with over budgets, what happens when you're so far under budget? Like you're it just seems like, how is that's on that item there, 63 or 520? Is it finished? Is that one?
So yeah,
That's the
so
one
so
we
we're
have.
so all the fees, all the invoicing hasn't come through, so we don't have a full cost accounting of that. So the bridge is reopened, but we haven't paid all the bills. They're still invoicing to the contractor to go through this account. So we can give you the contract award. So Dan's got maybe some additional information.
So this contract was awarded in April of 2019. We did a report to council, report 2019-31. It was awarded with a total anticipated project cost of just over $1.1 million. So I'm assuming at this point we're just waiting for some of the invoices to come in.
Any other questions on this? Okay, nothing, no recommendation out of here. So moving on to bylaws. Section 10, we have a number of bylaws there, and I think we added, we had to add one because we added the fees and charges. Oh, just that, okay. So I have a recommendation that bylaws 2019-67 through 2019-74 be read a first, second, third time and passed, signed by the mayor and clerk, and the corporate seal affixed. Councillor Foster?
I'd like to deal with item 2019-71 separately, and in particular, given the discussion we've had, and given that the estimates contain errors in the calculus, I'd like to make a motion that we defer that item, because there are errors in the report. It's very clear. We have an obligation to make sure that report is accurate, and it's not, with respect to the rate of increase of taxation.
So you want to defer just that one? Okay, so let's.
It's the approval of the estimates, which is approval of the budget.
It's the bylaw. We approved the budget already. It's the enacting bylaw. So he can make the motion. Okay, so you want to move that we defer
I'd like to make a motion that we defer item 2019-71, or
yeah, 2019-71.
and that we refer the budget back to committee because of the obvious errors in the calculus and the obvious errors and misstatements in the rate of taxation increase.
Yeah, we won't
That's
get
my
into-
motion.
Yeah, okay. Anybody want to second that deferral? Councillor Kittredge? All in favor of deferring that item of the bylaw? Opposed? That's defeated. Okay, so then we have a recommendation that I read already. A mover for the recommendation. Moved by Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor McCray. All in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, bylaw's done. Moving on to notice of motion. So we do have a notice of motion there. Councillor Kittredge has a notice of motion. I just want to explain a little bit behind the timing because there was some questions related to why this didn't come earlier. So this notice of motion, typically a notice of motion you receive the week before a council meeting. Members of council and selected members of the public did receive an email that included the notice of motion from Councillor Kittredge on November the 13th. So we have had that since November the 13th. And at that time, the clerk forwarded the notice of motion to the Integrity Commissioner for his advice on whether the motion should be permitted under Section 16 of our Procedures Bylaw. As a presiding officer, I do have the authority to rule the motion out of order, but I have decided to allow it to come to council for debate, and I'll allow Councillor Kittredge to explain that notice of that motion when the time comes. So you see that in front of you right now. And so we typically have that come before council in January, although we haven't seen it for a while, but. Councillor Van Leeuwen.
Thank you. When I was looking this one up, I did go back actually in my notes back to November 13th, where I see it received by some of the public here. But my question's more to Carrie. Like, are we not able to deal with this notice of motion now since we've had it? Like, what's the legalities on something like this? How would we be able to discuss this? I don't know why we'd drag this one along. I do definitely like the idea of having notice of motions and having time for a month. We've had this, so.
Through you, your worship, council could, by way of passing a resolution, could waive the notice provisions under section 16 of the procedural bylaw.
But I would have to make a motion to actually discuss it tonight. Like, is that what you're?
Yes, you would have, someone would have to move a motion to waive the notice provisions. If that, and seconded, and if that were adopted, then you could move forward with consideration of the proposed motion by Councillor Kittredge.
I feel like I'd like to discuss this right away. Like, we've had this for a while, and I don't know why would push this one back. So I'd like to make a motion that we actually discuss this motion tonight, or waive, whatever we call that. Sorry, what?
Waive the notice provisions.
Making a motion to waive the notice of motion, the notice provision.
Yeah, so can we waive the notice of motion of the timing provision?
Or you have that on the floor.
Yeah, can I put that out there? So let's see if council wants to discuss it, or if Councillor Kitcher is prepared to discuss this, because I feel like we've had.
Okay, so it's moved. Is there a seconder? Councillor Dunsmore, seconded. Question? Councillor Foster?
I believe the motion is on a point of order. The motion is out of order. Your worship, you've already ruled that we're going to hear this in 30 days.
No, I didn't rule that. I said
You just made a statement that we would deal with this in January as head
I
of
said
council.
typically we'd have a month.
My view is the motion's out of order. We should deal with it in January.
Well, we have a motion on the floor to deal with it today, so that our clerk said that that's a fine thing to do. Councillor Van Loon, or sorry, Councillor McLean?
Thanks, Kelly. Steve brought this motion forward, and he was under the impression it wouldn't be discussed till next month, based upon the notice of motion process. To change that ruling, and when he is not prepared to have that discussion this evening, seems inappropriate.
Councillor Kitchers?
I received a email from the clerk that it would be discussed in January, and that was the information I received. Also, some citizens put in that they wanted to be a delegation for this motion, and if that is denied, that is really recommending that this is a closed meeting, and so that is a problem. So those 2 points, first of all, that I was given that it would be discussed in a month, and I have the email, so I don't think that this is appropriate at this time.
No, and just to be clear, the typical way that we do it would be to talk about it in January. Also, the typical way that we receive motions was different than this one. We've had this on our plate since November the 13th. So, we have a motion to deal with it tonight. We got to deal with that notice of motion, and if that doesn't pass, then it goes back to looking at it in January. Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thank you. I guess the reason I ask that is, or want to waive that time or waiting period, is because generally from when council does a notice of motion, I think in the past we had a conversation even with Councillor McCrae, and through the conversation say, well, how do we get notice of motions and how can we get staff advice on certain things? And we said, make a notice of motion, request staff input, we can get a report and we can go through that process. Usually I would say that a notice of motion isn't something that the public engages in, or that we would, once a notice of motion is presented, and this is what's happened in the past, a notice of motion means it goes directly to council and council only for advice. So if only council is allowed, am I correct, is staff allowed to participate in this notice of motion? So that's what we had said was last time, if you're making a notice of motion, request it. So if staff is not allowed to even engage in this, then does council bring it even to the public for engagement? How does that? So that's where I'm struggling with this going, we've had it for a month, why are it's closed, it is here for our discussion.
There's no delegations allowed with notices of motion. That's just that's known, we all know that. Just like staff don't be prepared on notice of motion because there's no staff direction, there's no council direction for them to do work. It's a notice of motion, it's for this body here to decide. So, we can wait a month for us to decide, or we've had it since November the 13th. Councillor Foster.
We've really only had it since today. I know it was tabled, but only today are we giving notice of motion. Councillor Kittrus received an email from the clerk very clearly stating that we would deal with this in 30 days. You've advised us, Council, that the general pattern is to deal with it in January, in 30 days. I maintain the motion is out of order, and we ought to deal with this in January.
The motion is not out of order. The motion is a procedure that any councillor can use to waive a notice. It's not out of order. It's a completely legitimate thing to do, especially when we've had this for a while. It's a rule. It's not out of order. Councillor Van Lien.
Right, I do have one question. Has this motion changed at all since you emailed it out, Councillor Kittredge? Like, am I seeing anything different at this notice than from the previous when you said notice of motion? Thanks.
I also have an inquiry with the integrity officer about this notice of motion. And so until that actually comes back to me with some information, I think it is out of order. I also have requested information about the process of this notice of motion. And so I think that we should be waiting, because to proceed is to, first of all, I was told that it would be 30 days by the clerk. I have also inquired with the integrity officer about this notice of motion. And I have also information that I've requested about this notice of motion. So I think that to proceed, and lastly, I would like to point out the reason that the staff was not asked to participate in notices of motion was that that would require time and money spent on that. There is nothing in the procedural bylaw that the municipality has that prohibits citizens from being delegations in notices of motion.
Councillor Dunsmore?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about it because it was sent to members of the public, and that's what caused me concern, that this is out there in the public sphere in emails to members of the public, and they're debating this, yet we as a council haven't had the opportunity to debate it. So I'd like to talk about it and hear what your side of it is and understand where you're coming from. But I don't think we should leave this out there in the public domain over the Christmas holidays in particular, the way it's written.
Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. I guess this is a question for Clerk O'Kane. Did you actually send an email that said that he had 30 days to? I guess that would be something that I would like to know, whether or not he was told.
Through you, I did explain to Councillor Kittredge the normal procedures for notice of motions, that they are placed, notices given on one agenda, and the matter is then considered at a subsequent meeting. That is the normal protocol. However, I serve at the pleasure of council. So with a resolution on the table that perhaps contradicts that, if that is the wish of council, then that is what staff will adhere to.
Councillor McCray?
Councillor Kittredge, I mean, I'm a new councillor. I'm well aware of the protocol for how we're supposed to typically submit motions. You ignored that and took a shortcut. I have issues with that. I also, when I read your motion, I've had it for some time. I would certainly prefer to talk about it now rather than wait, because I have some serious concerns about it. The fact that this thing sits out longer, I think it conflicts with some things that I need to say.
Okay, I'm going to call to question. We've all had an opportunity to talk to this waiving it. So we have a mover and a seconder to waive the notice and deal with this motion tonight. All in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. So we'll deal with tonight. I will now.
Could we get we need a recorded vote on that.
We can have a recorded vote on that.
Sorry, this has gotten to be a circus.
What do we do now?
Still have quorum. Keep going. Just cannot publicly declare what they left.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so, yeah, so I was gonna give Councillor Kittredge the opportunity to introduce and move his motion. Provide opportunities for councillors now to speak to Councillor Kittredge's motion. Councillor Van Leeuwen.
Thank you. I'll explain why I really want to speak to it tonight. And actually, it's unfortunate that Councillor Kittredge actually left, because I really wanted to understand why he tabled this motion in the way that he did. It seems to have a lot of legal forefront aspect, but it says so much on the bottom, and it seems to speak ill of the staff and how that there's an unbiased, or that there is a bias in information. And I really wanted to understand what the underlying occasion here was as to why they're speaking, or what this motion said. And the majority of it was because it seemed to put a lot of onus on information, or I want to say CAO's job description posted on every single report. Very similar to, my first thought when I read it was, that's like putting our office swearing of oath on every single document that we actually pass. So it seems strange to me to actually place that in, or every person's job description and everything. It would be endless amounts, and therefore I thought, like, what's the real reason and what's actually happening here? So I thought we should really talk about this and not leave it hanging out there for too long. So I think that's why I wanted to speak to it. I really didn't like the motion, and I feel that there's something underlying in there that is being said that's not right.
Councillor Foster?
We have tonight a very good example of probably the intent. I can't speak for Councillor Kittredge, but we have before us a very good example of the intent of the motion, and that is the calculus of the budget. We have received a 2019 budget report that states that the total taxation.
Sorry,
I
that's
have the floor,
completely
sir.
out of order.
I don't think it is.
We're not talking about budget, we're talking about a motion.
This is an
that
example of
you've
this
had
motion.
since November 13th. That's a point of order. We're not talking about the budget here. We're
I'm-
talking about Councillor Kittredge's motion.
I
And that
am
has nothing
talking
to do with what
about
you're
the
saying.
motion. I am using this as an example to speak to the motion.
If you want to speak to the motion, speak to the motion.
We have tonight an example that speaks to the motion, inaccurate budget reports, and that is the spirit and intent of this motion. The
But
CAO
that's-
has a
Excuse me,
duty.
point of order, point of order. There's nothing in the whole motion that talks at all about what you're saying. So
Okay.
unless you're going to talk to the motion, then I'm going to turn it over to another councillor.
The CAO has a duty to give accurate information under the Municipal Act. The report tonight is inaccurate. That's my point.
Councillor Dunsmore.
So this motion insinuates that staff withhold information and don't present us with proper information. And since Mr. Foster wants to talk about the budget and bring that up as an example, I sit here and I listen to the calculations of the budget that's brought to me by chartered accountants, and I understand their math. You want to twist the numbers any way you want, that's fine. That's the reason I trust staff, is because they have the expertise. This motion talks about bias from staff. I expect staff to bring me a report with their professional credentials on the line, using their professional credentials and the associations that they represent, and give me the information that I can cast a vote with. I'm not here to second guess that information. If I choose to ignore that information, that's my right. But I want to hear it. And this makes it sound like they're somehow deliberately misguiding us, and that is not the case.
Councillor McCray.
Thank you, Mayor Lynn. I actually had something prepared, so I'm just going to read it. I guess first thing I wanted to ask of Councillor Kittredge was, did he write the motion or was it provided to him? I think I know the answer to that because I don't recognize his penmanship. This motion appears to be a request to improve government openness and transparency. Yet the motion in defense of it has not been explained to me how it will assist me in my role as a councillor. No evidence has been provided to prove a problem exists. What I interpret from this motion is that it is an attempt to avoid responsibility for making a bad or unpopular decision by blaming it on the CAO. This motion is a red herring. Upon closer scrutiny, this motion is not what it seems. It is part of a pattern of behavior consistent with a series of emails received the last few months by the CAO, council, and staff that are threatening, intimidating, and clearly designed to harass. It is apparent that this motion and the email are part of a concerted bullying and harassment campaign against the CAO, staff, and others. This motion is an attempt to instill distrust in the minds of the public towards their CAO, staff, and any councillor who defends them. It suggests a problem that does not exist. I have witnessed the negative impact of these emails on the recipients, and I too have suffered from the abuse from the email's authors. Most recently, there was an attempt to coerce me to support this motion. I do not appreciate residents' efforts to unduly influence a municipal official. It is okay to share your opinion, but not okay when it includes threatening consequences for non-compliance. The motion references several sections of our Code of Conduct, but conveniently overlooks sections 10 and 13.5, and I quote, Section 10, Discrimination and Harassment. All members of council have a duty to treat members of the public, one another, and staff with respect and without abuse, bullying, or intimidation, and to ensure their work environment is free from discrimination and harassment. The Ontario Human Rights Code applies, and where applicable, the Township's workplace harassment policy. Section 13.5, members of council should not maliciously or falsely injure or impugn the professional or ethical reputation or the prospects or practice of staff. Based on sections 10 and 13.5, I will not support this motion. Furthermore, the Occupational Health and Safety Act was amended in September 2016 by Bill 132. The Act requires council to provide a safe work environment free from bullying and harassment. It requires that harassment complaints be investigated. The CAO is responsible for dealing with staff complaints unless the CAO is the harasser or the victim, in which case it is the responsibility of the mayor and council. The Ministry of Labour has a jurisdiction to order a third-party investigation of harassment complaints if the employer does not follow through with an investigation. Although councillors are not supervisors or employers of municipal staff per the Municipal Act, we could be held to be employers pursuant to the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Our responsibility under OSHA applies to all staff and not solely to the CAO. If the CAO is being harassed by a councillor, the municipality could be liable for any damages arising from such harassment. Harassment by council may be seen as constructive dismissal. Demeaning comments, actions by a councillor towards staff could be the foundation of a defamation action. Both constructive dismissal and defamation could result in liabilities by the municipality. Harassment would not be protected conduct pursuant to Section 448 of the Municipal Act. Failure to ensure or recommend compliance with Bill 132 may not be protected by Section 448. Fines per the Occupational Health and Safety Act are not protected by Section 448. Fines could be up to $25,000 for an individual, or imprisonment for a term of up to 12 months, or both, or for municipalities, fines up to $500,000. Workplace harassment undermines our values of mutual respect, tolerance, and goodwill. The Township is committed to create a workplace that is free from harassment and discrimination within the meaning of the Ontario Human Rights Code and the Occupational Health and Safety Act. The Council is expected to uphold this standard. Regardless of what you may decide regarding this motion, I have already informed staff of my intent to request an investigation by a competent third party.
Thank you. I'm going to let all councillors speak once this, so the only person that hasn't is me, so I'm just going to provide my thoughts here. And I'm disappointed that the councillors left because I really wanted them to be part of this conversation. I find this motion completely inappropriate on a number of fronts. Even if I ignore that we received it at the same time as hand-picked members of the public, the content is 100% inappropriate and demonstrates a completely unwarranted lack of trust in our CAO, including the wording that, and I quote, "The Council of the Township of Centre Wellington directs the Chief Administrative Officer to ensure that every report to Council shall henceforth contain unbiased, professional advice and information that is sufficient and complete," obviously suggests that this is not currently the way that our CAO and senior team write reports now. it is a professional responsibility of every member of our senior team to behave that way already. We have already had a council-approved annual performance evaluation of our CAO that includes input from councillors. That is the right place to address CAO performance issues, and not in a councillor motion. It's not the right mechanism. I encourage members of the council to stand by page 4 of our current code of conduct that requires members of council to be respectful of the role of staff to provide advice based on their independent and professional expertise. And I hope council will soundly defeat this motion and commit to giving our CAO and senior team the respect and trust that they have earned. So I'm going to call the vote.
You don't have a mover or a seconder.
I didn't?
No,
Oh,
he left.
I never moved it. Let's get a mover and seconder. Let's get a mover and seconder then. I'll move it. Oh. Sure I can. I move the motion.
Council can do.
The motion is Councillor Kittrus's to make. I don't see how someone else can make Councillor Kittrus's motion. He's filed notice today. It makes no sense.
There's no requirement to be here for somebody to move his motion. I didn't tell him.
It's somebody else's
to
motion.
leave. I'll move Councillor Kittrus's motion as worded. Seconded by?
Well, I wanted to have the discussion, so I'll move it for discussion if we want to put it on the table. That's the
That's what we
assumption
want to
that was going to happen, so, I
Yeah.
mean, for
So-
discussion purposes, I want to move it. And I want to note, I've done that in the past where I've moved something
Yeah.
in order to, at a meeting,
So
even though
moved, seconded by Councillor Van Leeuwen. All in favor? No, all in favor of Councillor Kittrus's motion. All in favor of Councillor Kittrus's motion, which I moved. Opposed? And that's defeated. I would like to, as we were talking here, I put some thoughts on this motion because we've had it since November the 13th. And I would like to start the new year on a little bit more of a positive note, so I am going to move another motion forward. And you might have to help me with the wording a little bit here. I think it has to start with a whereas, so whereas the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington has already approved and implemented an annual performance evaluation for a Chief Administrative Officer. And this evaluation process already includes input from members of council. And whereas page 4 of our Code of Conduct for members of council requires that members of council be respectful of the role of staff to provide advice and information based on their independent and professional expertise. Now let it be resolved that for the remainder of this term of council, a councillor motion that refers to the performance of the Chief Administrative Officer will not be considered because such a motion is not an appropriate mechanism to address CAO performance. Now let it further be resolved that a councillor motion will not be considered if it does not demonstrate respect for the independence and/or professional expertise of the Chief Administrative Officer or any other township staff. That's what I'm moving. Seconded? Do you want to second it? Seconded by Councillor Dunsmore. Comment?
We're making a motion about an identifiable individual, and I think that's inappropriate. This subject needs to be dealt with, CAO performance in closed session.
No, I'm saying that we're not going to do chief, well, I'm saying exactly the same thing.
We're dealing with CAO performance, and
No,
that
we're
is
not.
out of order. It
We're
has to be
saying
dealt
we're
with in
not gonna-
closed session.
No, it does not. You're agreeing with me. I'm saying that we don't do that in a council motion.
I'm saying we can't deal with it here. It has to be dealt with in closed session. It's a personnel matter. We can't deal with that here.
That it wasn't related to that.
Council may choose to go into closed session. They do not have to go into any closed
closed session.
Yeah, I don't think we have to go into closed session for this. I'm saying,
Your Worship,
sorry.
we're dealing with CAO performance. And that's part of your motion. We can't do that in open session.
What I'm saying, and I don't want to read the whole thing again because I don't know if I'll get it right. What I'm saying is that exactly what you're saying, that the notice of dealing with the performance of the CAO is not something that should come as a notice of motion. And from this point forward, for this council, we're not going to do that. We already have a performance measurement process that includes closed session that we do outside of a notice of motion. So I'm agreeing with you that this is not the right time to do any notice of motion related to performance CAO. I'm saying that that's the way it is.
May I speak?
When I'm finished, you can speak. And when I address you, Councillor Foster.
Your Worship, you've missed the point entirely. This motion that you've made deals with the performance of our CAO. Such a motion is out of order and must be dealt with in camera in a personnel meeting.
It's not out of order. Councillor Van Leeuwen.
Thank you. I'm going to ask that it is reread because that was too fast over the with that much verbiage. The other piece is we're speaking here towards the process or policy in regards to how we would actually do the CAO review. We're not actually doing a CAO review. We're speaking towards policy, and that's what we do as of politics, is creating policy. So we should be discussing this as a policy item, and I think Councillor Foster is right in the sense that if we're going to do a CAO review, that needs to be closed session, and I think that was sort of what you're saying. And also, if it's just a policy as to how we do it, then we would talk about policies in open session.
Councillor McRae? Are you done?
Thank you, Marilyn. I guess my interpretation of what you're saying, and again, I'd like to hear it again, is basically what you're asking is that we not have any further motions come before council that is trying to bully, harass, the CEO or even staff in terms of questioning and bringing into them, say, talking about a performance review. All we're saying is we have a standard to maintain in terms of being against discrimination and harassment, and this type of motion that we just had before us obviously doesn't comply with that expectation. And all that the mayor is saying is he wants to make sure that any further motions come forward. We don't have that sort of stuff in it. Am I correct in my understanding?
Yes, you are. And I'm going to read it again just to make sure everybody's clear. Whereas the Council of the Township of Centre Wellington has already approved and implemented an annual performance evaluation for the Chief Administrative Officer, and this evaluation process includes input from all members of Council. And whereas page 4 of the Code of Conduct for Members of Council, which we've already approved, requires members of Council to be respectful of the role of staff to provide advice based on their independent and professional expertise. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the remainder of this term of council, a councillor motion that refers to the performance of a chief administrative officer will not be considered because such a motion is not an appropriate mechanism to address CAO performance. Now let it be further resolved that a councillor motion will not be considered if it does not demonstrate respect for the independence and or professional expertise of the chief administrative officer or any other township staff. Can I have a seconder for that? Question? Okay.
Is there a reason you pulled out at the very beginning there, you spoke towards, I got the annual performance review aspect, the code of conduct, respectful role of staff, and then you pulled out in the aspect of the CAO. Is there a reason it's just the CAO, or is it CAO and staff as an entirety, or because we actually work through CAO, that is our only contact?
That's why I identified the CAO, because he's our only employee as council.
Okay. But you do end off with something about staff again, so it seemed to code of conduct, respectful role of staff, and then I was trying to write those points, but.
So you maybe think I should remove the or any other township staff at the end to keep it just with the CAO?
Well, if we engage to, mind you.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be talking about any individual staff member in public anyway, so.
Right.
I'm okay if you leave it in and we just make it part of the process that you can't do it in open council.
Right. Councillor McRae, did you have something?
I was just going to also say, I'd prefer to have staff in there because
Okay.
I wouldn't like to see a motion coming before criticizing staff either.
Okay, seconded? Okay.
Yeah, he already seconded.
So- Oh, you did? All in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, 12, confirmatory bylaw. Bylaw to confirm the actions of council. I have a recommendation that bylaw 2019-74 to confirm the proceedings of council at its meeting held December 16, 2019 be introduced a first, second, and third time and passed in open council.
It's actually 75.
Okay. Moved by Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor Van Leeuwen. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Van Leeuwen, seconded by Councillor Dunsmore. All in favor? And we're adjourned. Have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Have a great time with family and friends, and all the best in the new year. We'll see you back in January.